Hello and welcome back to a new part of the video series on l- logic for second year BA LLB semester 4. In this video we are continuing with hypothetical argument, pure and constructive. Hypothetical argument is a form of reasoning based on conditional statement, that is if then statement. It is central to symbolic logic and frequently used in law, mathematics and everyday reasoning. I'm going to read through this text. Where I feel there's a need to explain, there I'll explain. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through the entire document. So let's start with the pure hypothetical argument or a hypothetical syllogism. A pure hypothetical argument consists only of conditional propositions. Okay. So what kind of propositions are they? All the three will be P, if P then Q, if Q then R, therefore P, if P then R. Basically Q is connecting, is the middle term which is connecting the P and R together. So if P leads to Q and Q leads to R, then P must lead to R. This is a chain of implication. This type of arrangement of syllogism is known as chain of implications. For example, if it rains, the road gets wet. If roads get wet, traffic slows. If it rains, traffic slows. So this is known as chain of implications. All statements are conditional. No categorical assertions like P is true is there. Next, let us look at constructive hypothetical argument. They are also known as constructive dilemma. A constructive hypothetical argument combines conditional statements and a disjunction either or. So the first is a conditional statement if then, and the other is a disjunction either or. So its logical form looks like this: if P then Q and if R then S, then a disjunction either P or R, therefore either Q or S. Just to explain this, two possible conditions are there, P or R. Each leads to a result Q or S. Since one condition must be true, which means one result must follow. If it rains, crops grow. If it is sunny, crops dry. Then either it rains or it is sunny. Therefore, either the crops grow or the crops dry. So what are the features of this type of hypothetical complex dilemma, constructive dilemma? It produces a disjunctive conclusion, which we already saw. It is based on alternative conditions, which is the first condition. The difference between pure hypothetical, this is based on structure. These are chain of conditions in pure hypothetical, whereas in a constructive hypothetical it is conditionals plus disjunction. The conclusion in pure hypothetical is conditional, whereas in a constructive hypothetical the conclusion is disjunctive. Pure hypothetical argument is if P then R, whereas a constructive hypothetical is Q or S. This is a linear reasoning in pure hypothetical, whereas in constructive hypothetical it is alternative reasoning. It is used in complex reasoning and proofs, helps derive conclusions from conditional relationships, and is widely used in symbolic logic and legal reasoning. Now, pure hypothetical means, another example, if law applies, punishment follows. If punishment follows, penalty imposed. Therefore, if law applies, then penalty imposed. It is very simple. I am not going into explanation of this. Constructive: if accused is guilty, punishment. If accused is insane, treatment. Either the accused is guilty or is insane, therefore either punishment or treatment follows. Pure hypothetical argument links conditions in a chain. That is, if P then Q, if Q then R, therefore if P then R. Constructive hypothetical arguments evaluates alternatives and derives outcome. Both rely on conditional reasoning. Both are valid forms of inference when properly structured. Next, we'll start with complex constructive dilemma, construct, rebut and refute. This comes for 13 marks. A complex constructive dilemma is an advanced form of hypothetical reasoning where multiple conditional premises are combined with a disjunction yielding a disjunctive conclusion. We have already seen what the form of a complex constructive dilemma is. If P then Q and if R then S, either P or R, therefore either Q or S. Either Q or S. Either P or R and therefore either Q or S. What is the meaning of this? If P happens, then Q follows. If R happens, then S follows. Either P or R is true. Therefore, either Q or S must follow. It is called complex because it involves two separate conditionals. This is conditional 1 and this is conditional 2. It produces a compound disjunctive conclusion. This is the conclusion. It's a compound disjunctive conclusion. Another example, if taxes increase, price rise. If subsidies decrease, price rise. So here this is a simple constructive dilemma. Either taxes increase or subsidies decrease. That is, either the taxes increase or subsidies decrease. In both the conditions, the price will rise in at least one way. Constructing a complex constructive dilemma. To construct a CCD, form two conditional statements, if P then Q, if R then S. Add a disjunction of the antecedents, that is, these are the antecedents and this is the disjunction. So add a disjunction of antecedents and conclude the disjunction of consequents. These are the consequents and we have this is the disjunction. So for example, if demand increases, price rise. So let's say demand increases, price rise. If supply decreases, then price rise. Again Q. Either demand increases, therefore, no, not therefore. P or R, therefore Q. Now, how do we rebut a complex constructive dilemma? Rebuting a complex constructive dilemma. Rebuttal attacks the dilemma by challenging the disjunction. So, deny the alternatives are exhaustive. That is, normally what we say is we attack we challenge the disjunction. Where is the disjunction? This is the disjunction. So, we challenge it. Denying that the alternatives are exhaustive. Not P and not R shows that neither P nor R must be true. Therefore, the conclusion does not necessarily follow. Another method to do is to do the rebuttal of the complex constructive dilemma is if P then Q and if R then S. So we have to transpose the consequence and negate them. So the rebuttal would be P not R not S and R not Q. This would be a rebuttal, and then you can word it in a sentence. Either taxes increase or subsidies decrease. Maybe neither happens. The dilemma fails because the disjunction is false or incomplete. I have covered this in great detail in my earlier videos. You can check that out. And the refutal is also by either attacking the major premise, or by showing that by attacking the attacking the minor premise, which is the disjunction. So we can do it by this method also, refuting, that is not P leads to Q, or neither, or not R leads to S. It shows that even if P or R is true, Q or S does not necessarily follow. We will cover up actual examples which have come in the question paper. Here I am just giving you a brief of as to how the rebuttal and refutal works. So if tax increases, price rises. Not always true. Government regulation may prevent price rise also. Breaks the causal connection. So we are, I'm just skipping all of this. It doesn't seem, okay, let's go into formal fallacies now. Formal fallacies are errors in reasoning that arise from defective logical structure, that is form of an argument. Even if all statements are true, the conclusion does not logically follow. The core idea is that a formal fallacy occurs when argument violates the rules of valid inference, making it logically invalid. So a formal fallacy happens when an argument violates the rule of valid inference. This is important. Violates the rules of valid inference, making it logically invalid. Now, the fallacy is concerned with the form and not the content, and it can be detected by symbolic logic, always results in invalid arguments, and independent of truth of the premises. Now, what are the common types of formal fallacies? One is affirming the consequent instead of affirming the antecedent. So if P then Q, now we are affirming the consequent here, that is this one, therefore P. So this is invalid. Assumes that because Q is true, P must be true. It is in fact the other way around. Example would be, if it rains, roads are wet. So what are we doing? We are affirming the consequent part. Okay, we are affirming this. So if we are affirming this, roads are wet, then we have to affirm it rained, but road could be wet due to multiple reasons, other reasons. Second is denying the antecedent. If P then Q, now instead of affirming the antecedent, we are denying the antecedent here. So not P, therefore not Q. Okay, because you have to deny both. Assumes that if P is false, then Q must also be false. It will be better by an example, by looking at an example. If it rains, roads are wet. Now we deny the antecedent here. It is not raining, therefore roads are not wet. But roads could be wet due to multiple reasons. Not necessary that the road will be wet only because of the rains. Undistributed middle. This is from the syllogism that we already covered. All A are B, all C are B. Therefore, can we say all C are A? No, we cannot, because of the middle term not being distributed. If we see, both are A type propositions and B is in the predicate position, and in A type propositions, predicates are undistributed. So both remain undistributed, and therefore the fallacy of undistributed middle has occurred. Illicit major errors. So these are the errors or fallacies that occur when a term is distributed in the conclusion but not in the premises. Illicit minor happens when minor term is distributed in the conclusion but not in the minor premise, whereas a major illicit major happens when major term is distributed in the conclusion but not in the major premise. Let us look at fallacy of 4 terms. Then the error is basically the argument uses more than 3 terms due to ambiguity. We have already covered this also by way of an example. a bank is a financial institution, river bank is muddy, therefore uh, river bank is financial institution on a similar line. So basically we are getting 4 terms here. Exclusive premises, where both are negative statements and therefore no conclusion can be drawn. That is, from 2 negative premises no valid conclusions can be drawn. This is known as exclusive premises. Drawing universal conclusion from particular premises. So from particular premises no universal conclusion can be drawn. That is, some A are B, some B are C. Therefore we cannot say all A are C. For example, sum of this A is in B, sum of this B is in C. We cannot say that all A are C or some A are C. We cannot say that because there is no connecting link between the two of them. Formal versus informal fallacies. Formal fallacies are based on structural defects, whereas informal fallacies are defects based on content and language. Formal fallacies can be detected by symbolic logic, whereas informal fallacies are detected through contextual analysis. An example would be invalid syllogism, whereas in an informal fallacy it could be due to ambiguities or appeal to emotion and so on, amphiboly and so on. So formal fallacies can lead to wrong judgments. For example, if crime occurs, then it will lead to punishment. Punishment exists, therefore crime occurred. This is a wrong fallacy. Again, this is which one? This is affirming the consequent. The invalid reasoning despite plausible content. Now, what is the importance of this? It ensures valid deduction, prevents misleading conclusion, and essential in logic, law, and mathematics. Finally, truth of statement is not enough. Structure of reasoning must be correct, and validity depends on logical form, not persuasion. Now let's go into informal or non-formal fallacies. This is important. Informal fallacies are errors in reasoning that arise not from faulty logical forms, but from content, language, or context. The argument may look structurally valid, yet it misleads through ambiguity, irrelevance, or weak evidence. What is the core idea behind this? An informal fallacy occurs when reasoning fails due to misuse of language, emotion, or irrelevant considerations rather than violations of formal logical rules. What are the main categories? There are 4 main categories of informal fallacies: fallacy of ambiguity, fallacy of relevance, fallacy of presumption, and fallacy of defective induction. So let us start with fallacies of relevance first. So arguments, these fallacies are basically arguments where the premises are not logically relevant to the conclusion. Okay, they are not relevant to the conclusion. What is not relevant? The premises. So for example, first one is appeal to emotions, uses feelings instead of evidence. For example, this law is cruel, so it must be wrong. This is appealing to the emotions. We are bringing in the word cruel to evoke emotions. So this law is cruel, so it must be wrong. So it uses feelings instead of evidence. Next is ad hominem, that is against the person or attacking the person instead of attacking the argument. It attacks the person, not the argument. Okay, so an example would be, he is corrupt, so his argument is false. Next is appeal to authority. It relies on authority without proper justification. Okay, celebrity supports it, so it must be true. This is appeal to authority. Next is appeal to force, ad baculum. It uses threat instead of reasoning. Agree with me or face consequences. Appeal to ignorance. It claims something is true because it hasn't been disproved. So we are in relevance, and total number of fallacies, sub fallacies in this are 5. So which are those 5? First one is emotion, ad hominem, then appeal to authority, appeal to force, appeal to ignorance. So appeal to force, appeal to authority, and appeal to ignorance. So we can rewrite this as, in relevance, A, E, I, AEI, HF. Ad hominem. So basically A is for appeal to authority, appeal to emotion, appeal to ignorance, appeal to ad hominem. No, it's not appeal to ad hominem, it's just ad hominem, and appeal to force. So we'll repeat once again: appeal to authority, appeal to emotions, appeal to ignorance, ad hominem, and appeal to force. AEI, HF. This is the fallacies of relevance. Next we'll look at fallacies of ambiguity. Here we have 4 different types of fallacies. One is fallacy of equivocation, then we have fallacy of amphiboly, fallacy of composition, and division. So what is basically what is ambiguity? It means it's an unclear or misleading language. And what was relevance? Relevance means, ambiguity of relevance means the premises are not relevant to the conclusion. And in that we had a code A, E, I, H, and F. In equivocation fallacy, in fallacies of ambiguity, we have equivocation, then we have composition, fallacy of division, and amphiboly. Fallacy of equivocation means 4 terms are there instead of 3 terms. So what happens is, same word used in different meanings. For example, light things are not heavy, feathers are light, therefore feathers are not heavy. It's misleading shift in meaning. So this is fallacy of equivocation means more than 3 terms or the same word used in different meanings. Fallacy of amphiboly occurs when there is ambiguity due to sentence structure. For example, I saw the man with a binocular. So basically the question comes up, who had the binocular? The man seeing had the binocular, or the man seen had a binocular? So it is not clear. A says that I saw B with a binocular. So did A have the binocular, or did B have the binocular? Then we have fallacy of composition. In this we are basically from the parts we are coming to the true or to the whole. So basically from particular to general, that is assuming what is true of the parts is true of the whole. For example, each player is excellent, that is particular, each player. So the team must be excellent. So we are generalizing for the whole team. Whereas in a fallacy of division is the reverse way around, from general to particular. So we can say the whole machine is heavy, therefore each part must be heavy. So we have four fallacies: C, D, E and A. We can remember that way also, C, D, E and A, or this is in this order is also okay. Equivocation, amphiboly, composition and division, these are all fallacies of ambiguity. This is also an important topic. It comes in the exam definitely. It will come somewhere or the other. Next, we are going for fallacies of presumption. It is basically unwarranted assumptions. You are presuming something which may not be true. For example, begging the question. It's a circular reasoning. What happens here is the conclusion is assumed in the premises itself. For example, this law is just because it is fair. So it is a circular thing. Why it is fair? Because it is just. Why is it just? Because it is fair, and it goes round and round. So this law is just because it is fair. So conclusion, what is the conclusion? It is fair. Why is it fair? Because it is just. Now both are the same term. Just and fair means one and the same. So it is begging the question or circular reasoning. This is in the presumption. Second is false cause. Here what happens is we are mistaking the correlation for causation. Correlation for causation. Meaning we are correlating A with B and thinking we are correlating A with B and thinking that A is the cause of B. So this is a mistake, not to correlate things with causation. For example, I wore a lucky shirt and won. So the shirt caused the win. So what is happening is the cause of the win we are attributing to wearing of the lucky shirt. Okay. So this is known as false cause. The cause is false. Earlier, before this, we are in fallacies of presumption. Begging the question is first, that is circular reasoning. Second is false cause. Both are important. They both come in the exams. It is also known as post hoc. So third is complex question. All the three are important ones. It is loaded question with hidden assumptions. That is, we pose a question like, have you stopped cheating? It itself, there is a question within question, means there is an assumption, hidden assumption, which says that you were in fact cheating and now you have stopped. Whether you say yes or no, the cheating remains. So this is complex question. So what we have three of them. One is begging the question. Also known as circular reasoning. One. Then second is complex question. And false cause. Also known as post hoc. So we have three fallacies in presumption. So we are presuming a circular reasoning, begging the question. Let's revise this again. Conclusion is assumed in the premises itself. So this law is just because it is fair. Second is false cause, that is mistaking correlation for causation. I wore a lucky shirt and won, so the shirt caused the win. And the third is complex question. It is loaded question with hidden assumptions. Have you stopped cheating? And so on. And finally we have fallacies of defective induction or weak induction. So in this we have three three fallacies: hasty generalization, slippery slope, and weak analogy. Hasty generalization would be drawing conclusion from small samples. Okay. Slippery slope is assuming extreme consequences without proof. And weak analogy is faulty comparison. We'll look at all the examples going forward. So we have three of them: weak analogy, slippery slope, and hasty generalization in weak induction. These are the arguments with insufficient or weak support. So
informal fallacies are common in advocacy and rhetoric, witness arguments, and public persuasion.
For example, the accused looks suspicious, so he must be guilty. Emotion replaces evidence. What is its importance? It avoids manipulation. If once we recognize the fallacies, we can avoid manipulation or improve our critical thinking or strengthen arguments and judgments. Informal fallacies show that even structurally correct arguments can be misleading. Language, emotion, and assumptions must be critically examined, and good reasoning requires both valid form and sound content. Next, let us go into fallacy of equivocation. We are going in depth now into few of the fallacies which I feel are important to cover. They can come in the short notes. So what is equivocation? Equivocation is a fallacy of ambiguity in which a key word or phrase is used in two different senses within the same argument, making the reasoning appear valid when it is not. So, core definition: an argument commits equivocation when it shifts the meaning of a term between premises, that is, between two premises, and conclusion, creating a false connection. For example, premise 1, word X meaning A, but in premise 2, the same word has meaning B, and conclusion based on treating A is equal to B will be false. The argument appears consistent but actually uses two different meanings. This will be important, this will be clear through an example. A feather is light or not heavy. We can use any of this thing. We are using feather is light. What is light cannot be dark. Therefore, a feather cannot be dark. So, this is a false conclusion, invalid conclusion. Light shifts from weight to brightness. Here, light means weight, and here, second, in this minor premise, it means bright. So, feather is light. What is light cannot be dark. A feather cannot be dark. Another example: all banks are financial institutions. River banks are eroding. Therefore, river banks are financial institutions. So, the actual conclusion should have been bank is the same. So, river are financial institutions. Here, the bank has two different meanings. Another one is nothing is better than happiness. A sandwich is better than nothing. A sandwich is better than happiness. Nothing shifts meaning here. Why is it fallacious? Violates clarity and consistency of terms, breaks the rule of univocal usage in logic, creates illusion of valid reasoning. In categorical syllogism, this leads to fallacy of four terms, because one term is used in two senses. Equivocation can distort legal argument. For example, the law protects rights. He has no right to speak. Shifting meaning may mislead interpretation. How to detect equivocation? Identify the key terms, check if the same word keeps the same meaning, this is very important, and look for subtle shifts in context. Now, how to avoid this? Define terms clearly, maintain consistent usage, and avoid ambiguous language. So, what is the fallacy of equivocation? It means same word but different meaning, whereas amphiboly means ambiguous sentence structure, that is, in the sentence structure itself is ambiguous. Equivocation shows that logical validity depends on consistent meaning of terms. A single word shift can invalidate an entire argument, and clear definitions are essential for sound reasoning. Next, we'll go into fallacy of composition and division separately, both of them. So these are all informal fallacies. Composition is a fallacy of ambiguity in which one wrongly assumes that what is true of the parts must also be true of the whole. Now, how do we remember what is division and what is composition? So when we say, when we talk about division or dividing, okay, what can we divide? We can divide only whole. So basically from whole to part. And of course the composition, to composition means to compose, to make. So how can you make? You can only make from part. So part to whole. Okay, this is how you have to remember composition and division. So composition is a fallacy of ambiguity in which one wrongly assumes that what is true of the parts must also be true of the whole. So the fallacy of composition occurs when properties of individual elements are incorrectly attributed to the entire group or system. The logical pattern is, let's say the premise would be each part has property X, therefore the whole has property X. This inference is not always justified. Let's understand this through an example. Each player on the team is a star, therefore the team is unbeatable. Individual talent does not equal team coordination. Example 2. Every brick in the building is small, therefore the building is small. This is of course a false, it's a fallacy. Then this is a fallacy of composition. Another example, each ingredient is tasty, therefore the dish must be tasty. Combination may ruin taste also, that is also possible, yes. Now why is it fallacious? Ignores interaction between parts, assumes simple addition is equal to the whole behavior, and overlooks the emergent properties. When composition will be valid? Sometimes the inference can be valid, but only when the property is additive or distributive. For example, each part weighs 1 kg. Therefore, of course, the total weight will be the sum of the parts. Weight is additive, so there is no fallacy occurring here. Each piece of evidence seems weak, therefore the entire case is weak, is a false assumption. Combined evidence may form a strong cumulative case. Now, how does it relate to other fallacies? When we compare composition with division, division goes from whole to parts and composition goes from parts to whole. So how to detect the composition? We have to ask, when the exam question comes in the exam, detect the fallacy, we have to understand, does the property logically apply to the whole system? Are the interactions or complexities ignored? So how to avoid it? Analyze the relationship between parts, check if property is additive or structural. Avoid assuming uniformity. The fallacy of composition highlights that the whole is not always equal to the sum of its parts. This is important. Properties may change when elements combine, correct. When you combine, when you are making a machine, the parts may be small and lightweight, but that does not equate to the machine also being light. Sound reasoning requires examining systems, not just the components. Now let's go into division. Division is another informal fallacy. Division is a fallacy of ambiguity where one wrongly assumes what is true of a whole must also be true of its parts. The fallacy of division occurs when properties of a group or whole are incorrectly attributed to its individual members or components. Logical pattern is, the whole has property X, therefore each part has property X. This inference is not logically justified. This will be better understood through multiple examples. First example, the company is very rich, therefore every employee is rich. False. This cake is delicious, so every ingredient is delicious. This is again a false. Some ingredients alone may taste bad. The team is excellent, therefore every player is excellent. Here the fallacy is that the team success may come from coordination, not individual excellence. Now, what is the fallacy in this? It ignores differences within the parts, assumes uniform distribution of properties, and overlooks complex internal structure. Now, when would division be valid? The inference is valid only when the property is uniformly distributed. For example, the cake weighs 2 kg. Its parts together make 2 kg. So, this is correct. But not every part individually weighs 2 kg. In law, the organization committed, let's take an example here. The organization committed fraud, therefore every member is guilty. This is a fallacy. Individual liability must be separately established. Of course, we have already covered this relation to composition. Composition goes from parts to whole, whereas division goes from whole to parts. So, how do we detect? First, we have to ask, does the property truly apply to each individual part, or is it a collective system level property? The way to avoid this fallacy is to distinguish between collective properties and individual properties and avoid assuming uniformity. The fallacy of division shows that what is true of a whole is not necessarily true of its parts. Systems and individuals must be analyzed separately. Sound reasoning requires careful distinction between collective and individual properties. Now let's go into amphiboly. This is another informal fallacy. Amphiboly is a fallacy of ambiguity that arises from a grammatically unclear or poorly structured sentence, leading to multiple possible interpretations. Amphiboly occurs when the syntax, that is the sentence structure, is ambiguous and an argument draws a conclusion based on one interpretation while another interpretation is equally possible. The key idea here is that ambiguity is not in a word like in equivocation, but it is in the structure of the sentence. So, this is the core distinguishing factor between ambiguity and equivocation. In equivocation, the ambiguity is in the word, whereas in amphiboly, the ambiguity is in the structure of the sentence. For example, I saw the man with a telescope. There are two meanings in this. I used a telescope to see a man, or the man had a telescope. Any conclusion based on one meaning is unreliable. Another example, flying planes can be dangerous, meaning we are not sure, is piloting planes is dangerous or planes that are flying are dangerous. Okay, there are two different meanings of the same sentence. The police arrested the thief in the car. The thief was in the car. The police arrested the thief in the car, means that the thief was already sitting in the car and the police arrested is one interpretation, or police were in the car. The police arrested the thief in the car. Why this is amphiboly is fallacious? Because it relies on unclear grammar and allows multiple interpretations and also leads to misleading conclusions. Let's take another example. Amphiboly is especially dangerous in legal contexts. The accused said the victim threatened him with a knife. What is the ambiguity in this? The victim had the knife, or the accused had the knife. That is, accused said the victim threatened him with a knife. So we are not sure who had the knife, whether the victim had the knife or the accused had the knife. Interpretation affects the guilt or innocence. Difference between equivocation and amphiboly, which we have already covered. Equivocation uses same word but different meaning, whereas amphiboly has an ambiguity in the sentence structure or unclear sentence structure. So, to detect amphiboly, look for unclear phrasing. Check if the sentence has more than one meaning. Ask, can this be interpreted differently? The way to avoid this is to use clear and precise grammar, avoid misplaced modifiers, and rewrite the ambiguous sentences. For example, I saw the man with a telescope can be corrected using a telescope. Either you say, using a telescope I saw the man, or I saw a man who was holding a telescope. So this is now you are clearing the sentence. So Amphiboly shows that poor sentence structures can distort reasoning. Clarity in language is essential for valid arguments, and even true statements can mislead if ambiguously expressed. Next, let us cover accident. This is again another informal fallacy. Accident is a fallacy of presumption in which a general rule is wrongly applied to a particular case where special or exceptional circumstances make the rule inapplicable. What it means is that a general rule is wrongly applied to a particular case, although the general rule has an exception. The fallacy of accident occurs when a general principle is applied rigidly, ignoring relevant exceptions or contextual factors. This will be clear by way of examples. A general rule would be all A are B. A particular case would be X is A. The conclusion is therefore X is B, ignoring the exceptions. This mistake lies in overgeneralization without qualification. Another classic example would be cutting people with knives is a crime. A surgeon cuts a patient, therefore the surgeon is committing a crime. Ignores the special context for medical purpose. Another example is freedom of speech should always be allowed. Therefore, threats or defamations should be allowed. It ignores legal and ethical limits. Birds can fly, penguins are birds, therefore penguins can fly. It ignores the exception. Now, why is this fallacious? It applies rules without considering the context. So, we are doing accident. Accident applies rules without considering the context. Accident ignores exceptions and qualifications. Also, the fallacy of accident treats generalization as absolute. Law frequently deals with this fallacy. For example, causing harm is punishable. A person acts in self-defense. They must be punished. Law recognizes exceptions like self-defense. Now, what is the relation to converse accident? Accident is from general to particular and ignoring the exceptions, whereas converse accident, which is also known as a hasty generalization, is from particular to general. So, how do we detect the accident? First, we have to ask, does the rule have exceptions? Is this a special? Is this a case special? Is this case a special or unusual? Is context being ignored? How do we avoid it? Recognize the limitation of the general rule or consider context and exceptions and avoid rigid application. The fallacy of accident highlights that general rules are not always universally applicable. Context matters in reasoning, and sound logic requires flexibility, not blind generalization. Now, we go into the next fallacy known as petitio principii, begging the question. Petitio principii, begging the question, is a Latin phrase for assuming the point at issue, which means it talks about circular reasoning, where the conclusion is presupposed in the premises instead of being supported by independent evidence. The core definition is an argument begs the question when it uses its conclusion either explicitly or implicitly as a premise, so nothing new is actually proven. What is the pattern of this type? First, a premise P or a restatement of P. Conclusion is P. The argument goes in circle rather than moving forward. Let's look at few of the examples. Like for example, there are three types: direct repetition, restatement in different words, or hidden assumptions. Let's look at the first one. The premise is X is true. Conclusion, therefore X is true. This is a direct repetition. There is nothing new has occurred in this. Restatement in different words. Premise: this policy is just. Conclusion: therefore it is fair. Hidden assumption: the key claims is smuggled into a premise. The key claim is smuggled into a premise. That is, it says, have you stopped cheating? Question mark. So if I say yes, then it means I was cheating earlier. If I say no, it means I am still cheating. So it is a loaded question. Hidden assumptions. So direct repetition, repeating as it is, for which there is no new conclusion coming up, and so on. Let us look at few examples. This law is just because it is fair. Just equals to fair. There is no independent support, means both are same. God exists because the Bible says so, and the Bible is true because it is the word of God. Again, a circular dependency. He is trustworthy because he always tells the truth. Trustworthy means telling the truth itself. So they are both the same. Now why is this fallacious? Because it provides no new evidence, assumes what needs to be proved, and creates an illusion of argument. Another example: the accused is guilty because he committed the crime. Guilty already presumes committed the crime. Another example is, this contract is valid because it is legally binding. The same idea is restated. How do we detect this fallacy? Is the conclusion already assumed in the premise? First check that. Are the premises independent reasons or just rewording? And how to avoid it? Provide independent evidence, avoid using synonyms or restatements as proofs, and ensure premises add new information. Now, what is the distinction between the three different fallacies? Begging the question, accident, and false charge. False cause. Begging the question is basically circular reasoning. Accident means applying general rule without exception, and false cause means wrong causal link. Petitio Principii shows that an argument must prove, not merely repeat. It's important. An argument must prove and not merely repeat. Valid reasoning requires independent support, and circular arguments may sound convincing, but they fail logically. In the next part of the video, we'll cover other non-formal fallacies in law.